Okay, welcome everyone. The
Howdy.
discussion tonight is an article that was in Moment Magazine at their Ask the Rabbis column, which is God the Ultimate Strongman? And I'm guessing that the subject is stimulated by the fact that around the world, strongmen seem to be back in favor in many countries. Um, so the question is God the ultimate strongman? And it actually raises an interesting issue. I can't remember. It's been a while since I read the article. But God is imaged in both ways. God is imaged literally as a man of war. In the Song of the Sea, um, which Miriam led the women in singing after the Israelites crossed the sea during the Exodus. Uh, God is famously described as an Ish Milchama, a man of war. And there is this image, I would say, among ancient gods, that gods were national gods, and that basically they were champions of battle. So you actually have stories in the Hebrew Bible of of the Israelites going into war and taking the Ark of the Covenant with them into war as a sort of a talisman. God would never let it be captured. Then, of course, it is captured I think, by the Philistines. Um, so God is on one hand clearly imaged as a warrior God, and even when we say Lord of Hosts, the word host in this context means armies, hosts of armies, legions of armies. So God is imaged that way, but also, because we all know, God is imaged as a loving God. I'm going to be doing a panel actually from a Catholic group, Jim, in your honor. Um, I don't know if you know that there's this meeting in Anaheim every March. Are you even aware of it? 30,000 Catholic educators attend, and I'm on a panel which was put together by Alexi Smith, who you may know. He is the interfaith coordinator for the local um, archdiocese, and we're going to be talking about God's aspect of compassion. And it's a really interesting subject because when God's attributes are described in Exodus, and we repeat it on high holidays, we sing Adonai, Adonai El Rachum V'Chanun. Rachum means compassion. We have this term Rachmanis, and Rachum comes from the same root as the Hebrew word Rechem, which means womb. God's love is a motherly love symbolized by her uterus, by her womb, of a Chanum, gracious, and so on. So God is described in both ways. And the article tonight is going to focus on this question of whether God is the ultimate strongman. So I'm going to share the screen and hopefully that will work. And I got to find you all again. Okay, so here we go. I presume you can see the screen, yes?
Yes.
Okay, good. So this is from last fall's issue, Is God the Ultimate Strongman? A little bit of takeoff on Michelangelo with God rather than reaching out to touch Adam, a fist with, I don't know if those are tattoos. Yeah, it look like tattoos to me. So God is macho God. Yes, Alan.
Just to clarify for me, the vernacular of typical English definition of what's a strong man mean?
Oh, I don't know. Clearly a man who is strong. I would say a leader who is characterized by strength rather than compassion. You know,
Could
uh,
it,
you
could
know,
mafia? I'm thinking about the mafia and their the stories of they're powerful, but they tend to be bullies. Does this include bully?
I'm not sure actually.
Okay,
I
all
don't
right.
know. I
Well,
don't know how I would define strongmen um,
okay.
and bullies, but anyway, let's read and see what the rabbis have to say. So, would someone like to read? This is from my buddy Gershon Winkler, Walking Stick Foundation. Someone like to read?
I will. If
Okay, thank you, Alan.
I not the title there, but all
Yeah,
right.
yeah, yeah. I don't know why that showed up. I actually sent out a PDF of the article, and I realized it was a little corrupted. So this is actually the online version, and I don't know. I guess this is a
That
link.
came from the other server. When
Yeah,
it's okay as long as the text is what you want.
yeah. The text I think is fine.
Okay, I humbly refer the question to rabbis far older and more learned than I. Beginning with the third century, Rabbi Yochanan, his response in the Babylonian Talmud tractate, we don't read those each time, right?
Yeah.
Begins in every circumstance where you will mention of the greatness of the Holy Blessed One, there you will alongside be mentioned of its humbleness. Nice. The sage goes on to quote from Deuteronomy, from Isaiah, and from Psalms, all of which juxtapose descriptions of God's mighty powers with attributes such as who advocates for the rights of the orphan and the widow and loves the stranger to give him and bread with bread and clothing, or father to those who are orphaned and who executes justice on behalf of widows. Another midrash has God speaking directly to us in the same passage. I operate as father and mother. Wait a minute, okay. As father and mother, I act as father, as is written in Psalms. Like a father has compassion on his children, so as Hawaii. Yeah, that's not a
Oh,
word I
actually, yeah. I'm not sure.
like Yahoo.
Yeah.
I mean, like
I don't know. We can actually.
all
I can
right.
probably click here and here we go.
Might be a substitute for God or Adonai, right?
Yeah,
Yeah,
13.
feels like that. Oh, you're looking at the Hebrew that goes with that.
Well, I just clicked on the link, like a father has
Yeah.
compassion.
It
Oops.
feels like it would be Yahoo, Yod Hey Vav Hey, the translation of
Oh,
that.
there it is, has father. Ki uh Karachamin Av Albanim Rechem. Yeah, I think it's just for Adonai. Uh,
Yahoo.
yeah,
Oh, hey.
yeah,
Yeah,
yep.
that would have been
Okay.
my
Yep.
okay. Back to where we are. Give me the first cursor where I need to be. There we're
Yeah.
at.
So does Yahweh.
I have compassion on those in awe of him. I act as mother, as it is written in Isaiah, like the comfort which one receives from his mother, so shall I comfort you. Thus, so I operate as father and as mother, per the Midrash.
Yeah, that's Midrash. Okay. So Winkler is focusing on every time God's greatness is mentioned, you find humility, or I would say comforting and compassion. And of course, I always point out that the most often repeated mitzvah, which is to say commandment in the Torah, is showing compassion and care for the powerless in society, widows, orphans, strangers, and so on. Okay. Someone like to read
People
humanist?
whose electricity is.
I'm sorry.
You said the powerless. I'm making a pun on it.
Oh, okay.
Electrical.
Right. Very good.
I'll read this one if you want.
Yeah, please.
Humanist. Is God merciful? Some Torah stories and rabbinical interpretations leave that impression. Is the biblical incarnation of God fiercely judgmental? Tales about Noah or Sodom or Gomorrah suggest that too. Can this God be simultaneously loving, capricious, and cruel? Abraham and Sarah might attest to love, but the Midianite women of Numbers 31 and Jephthah's daughter might feel differently. Is God a strong man? If some of this describes a leader ruling by force and violence, then the answer can be yes. But
Continue.
theology is not science. It's an endeavor built entirely without reliance on external evidence. From the Bible strongman to the rabbi's source of mercy, from the Kabbalistic Ein Sof to the mystical
Shekhinah.
Shekinah, and from Harold Kushner's limited deity to Mordecai Kaplan's power that makes for salvation, every description of God ever offered has been a human invention. If some find the idea of God as strongman unappealing, they are free to reinterpret it just as people always have.
Yeah, so this is a humanist rabbi who basically is saying, I would say the idea of humanist Judaism is that it's Judaism without God. So if you don't have God in Judaism, all you have are human constructions. So, I think the answer is you can make of God what you like, since God isn't real anyway. Um, so, I'll just point out in this paragraph, he mentioned the ideas where God shows up as a strong man, rabbi, source of mercy. Well, in the Bible, God is also talked about as the merciful one quite often. The Kabbalistic Ein Sof, I think Kabbalah's Jewish mysticism. Ein Sof means without end or without limit. So God is beyond human understanding, and not the Ein Sof is not directly connected with humanity, but down connected with humanity is Shekhinah. The word Shekhinah, which is a feminine word, in the Bible, it is used several times to represent the presence of God. The word Shekhinah comes from the same root as the word Mishkan, which is the tabernacle. We have our prayer book is called Mishkan Tefillah, the tabernacle of prayer. And the Hebrew word Shechonah means neighborhood. So Shekhinah in biblical Hebrew represents the presence of God. And since it's a feminine term, the Kabbalists, where they say the mystical Shekhinah, since Shekhinah is a feminine word, words are either masculine or feminine, and words that end in ah are often feminine. So the Kabbalists have a lot of fun playing with the idea that this is a feminine aspect of God, who is most closely connected with humanity. When I did a program a while ago on Jewish mythology, and the descriptions of Shekhinah can get quite imaginative and even sexual, and the Shekhinah becomes very close to the concept of a goddess, that God has both masculine and feminine aspects, and we can think of them as God and goddess. So Harold Kushner's limited deity, what I would say is Kushner analyzing God suggests that God doesn't have power to change nature. I think I would say to reach in and violate physics. We talked about that some on Monday also. To Mordecai Kaplan, who is the founder of Reconstructionist Judaism, who images God not as a personality or an entity, but the power in the universe that leads us toward redemption and salvation. So it's almost like a property of the universe. And so Judaism is a culture which nurtures us toward alignment with that property of the universe. It's kind of interesting. Reconstructionist Judaism is really interesting. And it's even more interesting because they're always reconstructing themselves. So every time you think you have them pinned down, they come up with new brilliant innovations. So anyway, I just wanted to comment on that, and that may be more information than you needed to know. Hi, Joanne, welcome.
Thank you. It's good to see everyone.
Okay, we are reading an article called "Is God the Ultimate Strongman?" So,
could you
sure.
It talked about Numbers 31 and the Midianite women. Could you talk about that?
I can.
I actually looked at this and read Numbers 31.
Okay, let me just take a quick look at Safaria. Tanakh, Numbers. I don't remember it by. Can you see Safaria as I'm loading it now?
Yes.
Okay, good.
Yes.
Yeah, so basically, God is trying to go back and see what's going on before this. All right, without really studying this, basically, the Midianites are enemies, and it looks like God is saying, "Avenge the Israelite people on the Midianites." And so Moses speaks and sends out troops to fight Midian. And let's see, and sends a priest with them and sacred utensils, and they take the battlefield and they slew the king of Midian and the five kings of Midian. They put Balaam to the sword. They took the women and other non-combatants and seized booty, all their beasts, all their herd, all their wealth, and they destroyed by fire all the towns in which they were settled and their encampments, and they gathered all the spoil, and they brought the captives. Let's see what other fun things they did.
At 14, it gets, I actually read it. At 14, it gets really interesting here.
Which one? I'm sorry.
At 14.
Okay. Moses became angry with the commanders of the army and the officers who had come back, saying, "You have spared every female." Yet they were the very ones who, at the bidding of Balaam, induced the Israelites to trespass. Therefore, slay every male among the non-combatants, and slay also every woman, who I guess was not a virgin, who has known a man carnally, but spare every female non-combatant. So it's pretty troubling. There are lots of troubling texts in the Bible, and this is a very troubling text. So entirely appropriate to.
The term you're looking for is war crime.
I'm sorry?
The term you're looking for is war crime.
I wasn't looking for war crime, but thank you for offering it. You're saying God is guilty of war crimes, or God is instructing Moses to kill people guilty of war crimes?
Well, I suppose both. I meant in the context of killing non-combatants, but after the combat is over, just to being a war crime, or killing the people who've been taken prisoner being a war crime. But whether it's Moses doing it, committing a war crime, and God instructing Moses to do so, or God doing so, is somewhat of a.
Okay, fine, I got it. So Jim, yeah, you're, other than just saying oy vey, what's going on here? Do you have a more specific question?
Well, I remember reading a recording of this, some tapes, and the fellow said that this is toward the, I don't know if he was trying to apologize for it, but toward the end of Deuteronomy, Moses is tired, old, and angry.
Right.
And he tells them to do this. And you probably know more about, I'm sure you better than me, but he said that the rest of the time when Moses told the people to do something, he would say, and they did as Moses had instructed them.
Mm-hmm.
It doesn't say that here. So there's no evidence.
Right. So here, yes, that's a very good point
on this.
Because here it said, God spoke to Moses saying. So this is coming directly from God. Yes? I mean, that's,
yes,
like, without having studied it.
The people.
Yes. So,
but
Nakem, which is, Nakem, Nakama. I think Nakem means to make clean. Let's just see what they, avenge, revenge. Yeah. Okay. So it's definitely vengeance. And it's,
but it doesn't say that God told Moses to have them kill every man, woman, and child except for the virgins that they want to keep as sex slaves.
Oh, okay. So yes, Okay, so that's actually a very good point. So if we read it carefully, it looks like the only thing that God is saying is avenge the people, and pretty soon you, Moses, are going to die. Because Moses, at the end of Numbers, Moses is in the last stages of his life. So then Moses has all of these specific commandments as to what he is interpreting the vengeance to be, and he gets upset because we didn't kill enough women, and so he goes on, and so it's pretty awful. So
Yeah.
so is that basically your point, or let me not try and answer a question you haven't asked?
Well, it's this is troubling for me, probably for everybody. And so I was just my saying, if you want to know something about the Hebrew Bible, ask a rabbi. So I thought I was picking your brain on this if you had any insight.
Okay, so my take.
That's why I brought it up, because and God is a strong man in this one, I say, but not a
Yeah,
good
so
one.
this is as I can't remember now which author refers to this. This, I think, is the humanist discussion. Oh, no,
Yeah.
God in
Yes.
Numbers 31. Yeah. Okay. Yeah. So this is a really good example of a very troubling bit of Torah. I think my guess is we would all agree on that. So the way I deal with it, you've heard me talk about this before, is you can take one or two positions, one of two, and probably more, but I think of two extreme positions of what is in the Torah. And I love to call them door A and door B. Okay? So in door A, we are, I would say, ultra-Orthodox Jews, and we believe literally everything in the Torah and Jewish tradition is true. And so their discussion of this is, if God actually tells you to go and do these awful things, you do them. Because God is, the source of justice and authority. And if God tells you to do it, you do it. But by the way, with the close of prophecy, God doesn't do that anymore. And the rabbis put rules on how to conduct war and so on. So if you're inside door A, where you take this stuff literally, you might have trouble with why did God do it in this case, but it doesn't give you justification for what we do in Gaza, for example, to be very specific. Okay. But the ultimate explanation is that if God tells you to do it, God must have a reason, and we should do it. Over here in door B, I'm over here in door B. Hello, door A. In door B, I'll just go to the extreme. I'm a Reform rabbi. I don't take the text literally. I think the text has a lot to teach us, but I don't take it literally. And when I read passages like the one we just read, I think those are historical artifacts, which are our memory of battles that the Israelites fought in ancient times, and they attributed, the rules of war to being God-given, but I don't take them literally, and it doesn't give me a problem with God. It gives me another reason to question whether the text should be taken literally. So I'm happy in door B. The guys over in door A are very happy in door A. The only problem is when we in door B ridicule the people in door A for taking it literally. I don't know if that makes sense. I sometimes think I have trouble getting that.
And vice versa, by the way.
I'm sorry?
You said we and
vice versa. Yes. That's actually a very good point, because in door A, they are criticizing us in door B by saying, who are you to pick and choose what in the Torah is actually God's words and what is not God's words? And I think that is a respectable argument. I can address it, but it's a respectable argument. So I would say inside each community, we're okay, but it's when we try and criticize the other community from our community, it gets difficult and awkward. And then I can't help but point out, I would say in much let me put it this way, in many Christian traditions, Christians will point to these kinds of texts to say that the God of the Old Testament is a God of vengeance, whereas Jesus is a God of love. And of course, I would dispute that, but I'm not a Christian, so it's not my place. Alan.
Well, everybody who gets that,
that's door C for Christians.
No, anybody who's thrown that at should read Rabbi Shea Held's book on God and love, and from a Jewish standpoint. My point is that it's not just that the people in A reject B and B reject A. They make it so polarized. We're all guilty of that. So I'm not saying they. We make it so polarized about right and wrong. In other words, and they make it more general than saying, I don't want to do your practice of not keeping kosher, but it's okay that you do it. I just don't want to do it because I don't follow I'm in door B, right?
Right.
But and it works both ways. So I'm not picking on the door A people, but we both tend to do that in an unconstructive way rather than letting people respect their ability to do things different than we do.
Yes, although I have to say, I understand the idea that if God says do it this way and you believe God says do it this way, that places a requirement upon you. And I will jump to what is probably the most controversial element that I can think of, particularly in today's world, and that is abortion. If my understanding of the Bible in door A, although door A, the Jewish door A wouldn't interpret it this way, but some could interpret abortion as murder, then if I really believe abortion is murder, it's not okay for me to say, well, you don't believe abortion is murder, so therefore you can go and murder. I mean, I don't, that's a difficult argument.
Okay, it raises the question of who's responsible to do what. And I'll give my personal recent experience. Right. I was in a conservative synagogue for Shabbat morning. And because of my vision, when they started reading the Torah, I took out my phone and looked at Sefaria so I could follow the text.
Right.
And I got scolded by this guy as he was God. I mean, it was a congregant of the synagogue. I was a guest. I mean, I was a guest. And I took we had discussion, but my liberty on that was the same liberty that I thought that the liberal movements have, that you can drive to shul. You should be able to, read it. I couldn't check my email. That would be not fair. But I was just looking Sefaria, and I got dumped on that. I'm not allowed to.
No, but conservative Jews, conservative Judaism would say you're not allowed to use electricity on Shabbat.
But in this temple, they have microphones, and so that conservative has a wide range of what they are.
Yes.
But this particular congregant, I'm talking about what is our individual fair being the combination being respectful and honoring the rules that you follow and making somebody follow their rules, right? Anyway, so I'm just adding.
Yeah. So that's, I mean, I would say in that sense, there's a phrase called derech eretz, which literally means the way of the land. And that is, what is the derech eretz, or what is the custom in that particular synagogue? They may be okay with using a microphone, but they may not be okay with you taking out your cell phone, even though you're using it for Sefaria.
There's no sign to help me through that. When I talked to the rabbi, just to add that about this, she said, I'm kind of new, and at Rosh Hashanah, I pointed out to people with vision impairments, they welcome to use their iPads, but I haven't been telling the Shabbat visitors all the time.
Oh, okay.
So it's a learning curve combination. It's complicated.
Yeah. Okay. So Jewish renewal. I don't know, Joanne, whether you're up to being our designated reader. We're asking people to read, looking for volunteers, and we've had several. The ones I don't know.
I can read.
All right. I mean, let me see if I can do this.
Well, all right. You're going to read, Jerry?
Hold on a second. Joanne, did you say you were going to read?
I can read. I'm on my phone, so it might take me a little bit longer.
Okay. All right, we'll see how it goes. If it's difficult.
Right. If it's I'll tell you or you tell me and we'll change, okay? All right. Certainly in some of our biblical texts, God is the Gibor Milchama, the war king, the ultimate and almighty power. For a long while, that image drowned out other, more tentative portrayals of God in the Bible. After all, a small nation trying to survive in a dangerous landscape doesn't need a warm and fuzzy God. It needs a warrior God giving life and dealing death. Has any deity ventured to go and take one nation from the midst of another by war, by a mighty hand and an outstretched arm and awesome power?
From Deuteronomy, yes.
But our rabbis, having experienced the trauma of the loss of the temple, realized that the earlier God model was not working for them. God was no longer functioning as the super Spider-Man who swooped into rescue the Israelites from Egypt. In a not famous enough Talmudic text in Yoma 69b, the rabbis pondered the change in paradigm they were living through. After all, each of the adjectives that Moses had used to describe God, Gadol, Gibor, Norah, great, mighty, awesome, seemed irrelevant when heavens could dance with impunity in God's palace and destroy it. So now what? The rabbis came to the notion that a different kind of strength was called for. God was holding. I lost you. Hold on.
Okay, I'll read it. It's just
God
one little.
was.
Can you see it? God was holding
All
back.
right. Where am I now?
Let me finish. It's only one sentence.
Oh, here. Okay, I got it. Actually,
okay.
I'm here.
Okay, go ahead.
And allowing history to unfold, even if Israel was to be harmed by other nations, as with a parent refraining from intervening on a playground, the hardest thing of all is self-restraint. It's a sign of ultimate strength.
Okay.
Okay.
Thank you.
All right.
Okay. Would someone like to read Reconstructionist? Lois, were you volunteering?
Sure.
Okay, thank you.
If God is ultimately unknowable, far beyond human form or understanding, then let's avoid anthropomorphizing in imposing finite human characteristics upon the infinite. We box God in. Such images are fine if held humbly, but devastating when deemed truth. For starters, they try to have it both ways, don't they? For starters, since humans all bear the divine image, divinity must be non-binary, neither male nor female. God is no man of any sort, much less a strong man. Sure, some early sources may depict God as a bossy ruler, but these tell us more about the author's time and less about the timeless one. Richer metaphors abound. Better than praying to a dictator, let's embrace the mystery. Be nourished by divine water. Seek strength from the rock. Align with the unity. And this is hilarious. It's like poetry. And what is strength anyway? Birkei Avot defines it as mastery over one's impulses. In Avot de Rebbe Natan, it's turning an enemy into a friend, hardly the moves of a blowhard politician. So-called strongman leadership that projects deceitful and insular machismo strength is deeply un-Jewish and undivine. Idolaters worship the part in place of the whole, whereas the holy and just are devoted only toward divine oneness. Let's affirm that godliness unifies rather than divides.
The true godliness unifies rather
True
than
godliness. Okay.
Yeah.
This
Okay.
is a
Thank you.
beautiful passage. I mean,
Yeah, it is very poetic.
Yeah, yeah.
So one of the things that I'm getting, and now as we're reading this carefully, is that sort of early images of God is as a strongman, and at a time when Israel was trying to establish itself as a nation by justly and properly stealing the land of other nations, namely those Jebusites, otherites in Canaan. We needed a leader who was strong. And particularly in the rabbinic period, who now the rabbis are going to go back and judge what is the nature of God and what is good, what does the Bible really mean? The rabbis are writing during a time of powerlessness. The Talmud, which is the central text of the rabbis, is codified in about the year 500, when there have been at least 2 or 3 unsuccessful revolts against Rome. The Jews have gone from basically controlling their own fate, having their own state, to being under the dominions of the Greeks, the Romans, and then Christians. And pretty soon they'll be under dominions of Muslims once Islam starts to arise. So the rabbis are writing about God in a time of powerlessness. And so I would say they will tend to emphasize not the power of God, but the power to unite of love, compassion, doing the right thing. So it's sort of almost a historical scheme. And I would say also about Christianity, the central text of Christianity, the New Testament, is written and codified during a period of Christian powerlessness. Christianity gains power in the 4th century under Constantine, when the emperor first makes Christianity a licit religion and then makes it the state religion of Rome. And then we can sing about Christian soldiers, and crusades, but the central texts of Christianity are being written during a time of powerlessness, which will tend to embrace the ideas of peace and love and compassion.
I have a comment.
Sure.
Or a question. I was thinking about what Alan started with about what's a strong man. Does it make a difference to people on whether God is acting him or herself, or he's giving orders to other people to be, in this case, mean and things that make us uncomfortable? Yeah, I mean, like when I'm thinking of earlier things, say like the flood, him or herself is acting, him or herself.
Right.
But in all of this, he's telling other people what to do. I mean,
it's a good point. In the early text, at least as we look at our chronology, God seems to act directly. So from the flood to destroying the Tower of Babel, to parting the sea for the Israelites to go through, to sending manna, to destroying the walls of Jericho. God seems to be acting directly, almost like I would image Roman gods to do. Now, in the text that we just read, Numbers 31, God is ordering Moses to take vengeance, and now it's Moses that takes vengeance. So God is sort of one step removed. And you're asking, Lois, does it make a difference? I would say if God orders us to do one thing, or orders humans to do one thing, and then we do a whole slew of things to achieve that objective, you can reasonably ask, were we going over and beyond what God wanted us to do? Whereas if God directly tells us to do X, Y, and Z, then it's hard to let God off the hook. I don't know. That's sort of my
I
take.
guess I'm back to Alan's question. What does it mean to be a strong man? Is God a strong man if he's ordering humans to do this or that?
Yes, so I would say, without getting into the literal definitions, if we see the primary characteristic of God as strength and vengeance, and a man of war, and the Lord of hosts of armies, if that's your image of God, then I see God as a strong man. If you see God as the God whose primary commandment is that we be nurturing and loving to people, then I would say that's not an image of a strong man. When I think of a bully, by the way, I don't know, somebody raised the question. I think a bully is someone who uses strength against people who are less strong. So that's I would say a subset of a strong man. Stephen.
I think, okay, we're having an issue with the morality of God telling people to murder. But the point of God doing it directly versus God telling us to do it, if for people who believe that every death is God's will, that nobody dies unless God wants them to die, is God telling people to murder any worse than any other death that is also God killing someone?
So I believe Judaism, even the mystics would say that murder, which is one person unjustly taking another person's life, certainly violates God's commandment, and we have free will. So I don't think even the mystics would say that murder is God's will. But on the other hand, the mystics say everything is going according to, what God has in mind. So I have trouble squaring that, which is one of the main reasons I'm not a mystic.
Okay, well, what I'm saying is God telling us to kill people versus God killing people. Is God being more or less or equally murderous in one situation as in the other?
So when you say God telling us to kill people, you're talking about like Numbers 31?
Okay, since that's where we're at right now.
So there's only limited places in the Bible where God directly commands people to take the lives of other people. Oh, and by and large, that doesn't happen anymore. And the Talmud teaches, even if God shows up and says, you know what, it's time to murder these people, forget what I said in the Talmud. I'm telling you right now, this is my command. Go out and murder these idolaters, heathens, and so on. The Talmud teaches us, even if we agree it's actually God speaking, we don't listen. God doesn't have a vote. I mean, there's this wonderful passage in the Talmud where the rabbis are arguing about a point of law, and God shows up, and the rabbis basically tell God, mind your own damn business. Rabbis are making Jewish law here. Who asked you? And basically, prophecy is closed. So we have the problem of how do we interpret Numbers 31, Dor A and Dor B. I won't repeat it. There is a commandment against murder. It's the only commandment. Well, there's a commandment against murder, lo tirsach. There isn't a commandment against killing. There's a commandment against murder. So presumably, if we murder, we are violating God's commandment. I mean, that's clear. If you're a mystic and saying God intended you to do it anyway, I'm not sure how to deal with that. That's one of the many problems I have with mysticism. But in the Torah it says if you murder someone, your life is to be taken. You are to be killed. It's the only commandment that's repeated in every book of the Torah. The commandment that murder is punished by execution. Alan.
Is it relevant to add to what you just said about not following what God said in that spirit? The story of the oven of Achanai,
right,
where God concedes the people are in charge, so to speak. If I'm misstating that a little bit, you know, God.
Yeah. So at the end of the story, the rabbis run into Elijah. The rabbis are always running into Elijah. Why? Because Elijah doesn't die. Elijah goes into heaven in a fiery chariot. So Elijah serves as a conduit between earth and heaven. So after the rabbis tell God to mind your own business, Elijah, several hundred years later, a rabbi runs into Elijah and says, "What was God's response when we told God to mind God's own business?" And Elijah reports that God laughed, saying, "My children have bested me." So basically, the main thing is prophecy is closed, so that you may be guided by hearing God speak to you, but you're not writing a new book of the Bible. The official prophecy is closed, and so we had this guy who murdered Muslims at prayer in the cave of Machpelah.
Yeah, he's connected. He's the mentor of the current Ministry of Security.
Right. So there are, I would say, right-wing fanatics,
really,
who would do what we would consider to be murder, but justify by biblical passages. But if they justify it by God saying, by saying God spoke to me and told me to do this, it's not justifiable. We don't listen to God. If God shows up and tells us to violate Jewish law, we rely on Jewish law, and the rabbis, we don't believe that God has told us to do that.
But if I can add, we try to respect in the liturgy during holy days that we think about what we live and we don't live, all the list of things about what God will either allow you to live, who lives and who dies, right? So when we do that, we take away our agency, if I can say it that way.
So you're talking about a prayer, the Unatana Tokef, I think.
Yeah, that's right.
Right, which is fairly late medieval, which is a thought, and I have to say, I don't know any rabbi that takes that literally. Now, most of the rabbis I know are Reformed, so that's
well, I'm not even saying literally, but we are, treating God having say in the events of the next year is being significant. Maybe not literally, but
yeah. So my interpretation of that is God is begging us to practice prayer, repentance, and acts of justice, and that will temper the decrees that may exist. But I also noticed that in the Torah reading on Yom Kippur, God basically says, "I place before you a choice: life and blessing, death and curse. Choose life." So if we have that as our text from Deuteronomy, if we have that from our text, then clearly we have free will, and we can choose to do the good things, or we can choose to do the bad things, that it's not preordained. Okay.
Well, maybe that it's preordained who's going to be murdered, but we decide whether or not we're going to murder people, and then if we decide not to, somebody else will murder the people who God has decided to murder. And if we decide we are going to murder people, God somehow arranges things so that we're unsuccessful when we're trying to murder someone who God has chosen to survive, and so that when we fire into a crowd randomly, the bullets happen to hit whomever it is that God wants them to hit, and so forth.
Yeah, I mean, I think it's an argument that's impossible to refute. That to say whatever happened in the past was God's will and God planned it that way. But does that mean I shouldn't put on my seatbelt when I drive? Does that mean I shouldn't take my medications? Does that mean I shouldn't, support blood drives? Does that mean I shouldn't, help victims of the fire because it was God's will that this? I mean, I think there are people who would say that. Does that mean we shouldn't practice medicine?
There are passages that say to help sick people or visit the sick or something.
I know, but do they make a difference? Because it's God's plan. So I would say that's an argument which is an interesting, theological argument, but I don't find particularly compelling or helpful, particularly if it leads to the idea that we really don't have any influence over events, therefore, why bother doing anything? Because I think, and my understanding is, although I'm certainly not a Buddhist scholar by any stretch of the imagination, but my understanding is there are strains of Buddhism that sort of go in that direction, that you should minimize your expectations and just sort of be happy with what you have. But I've heard Buddhists speak, and they say, no, that's really not what Buddhism teaches, and I trust them. But I'm confused by it. So there's a phrase that my wife knows in Arabic, which on the streets of Morocco, if someone is starving and begging for food, there's a phrase in Arabic which is basically God will provide for you. Well, I've got a big problem with that. I think I talked, I think it was Monday, about this, that one of the rabbis said there's a time to even act as if you're an atheist. And his students are shocked. And he says, when should you act as an atheist? And he said, when you see someone in need, you should not rely on God to help that person. You should assume there is no God, and it's up to you to help that person. Or I would say that, God has sent us to help that person. So if you, I certainly don't believe in predestination and fate, and that we don't have, the possibility to influence history, and I don't know what else I can add to that. I think I'm going to read one more section. It's Reform, and it's from Laura Novak Weiner. And Laura's mother, Marcia Novak, lives in Oxnard, and I know occasionally listens to these videos. So hello, Marcia. I see your daughter at the Rabbis conference, and Laura was just promoted to basically be the local head of the rabbinic program at HUC in Los Angeles. There's a big reorganization of HUC.
Known her a long time too. Yeah, not her mother. Know her. Yeah.
Okay, so I'm going to read Reform, and then we'll pick up from there and continue the discussion. The Talmud teaches that God created the world with equal measures of din, judgment, and rachamim, compassion. To have more of one than the other leads to an imbalance in how humans treat each other in the world. God, too, embodies this balance between din and rachamim. When angry, God wants to enact harsh judgment, yet there is always someone there to be a voice of compassion. Abraham negotiates when God wants to destroy Sodom and Gomorrah, arguing that there are righteous individuals who would be innocent victims of God's wrath. We see God's rachamim emerge when God listens and responds benevolently. So while God is authoritarian at times, God is also open to changing course, and one might even say learning and growth.
When does God listen and respond benevolently? The city is still destroyed.
I'm sorry?
When in the story of Sodom and Gomorrah does God listen and respond benevolently?
God says if you find 10 righteous people, I'll save the entire community, but they don't.
Knowing that there aren't going to be the 10 righteous people, the city's still going to be destroyed.
Well, yeah, I don't think the story contemplates that God knows that already, but we can argue about that. In other moments, God models compassion in response to humans' harsh judgment. Jonah wants to destroy all of Nineveh for its inhabitants' sinful behavior. God shows mercy and teaches Jonah how painful it would be for God to destroy the community. God's embodiment of both din and rachamim provides a valuable lesson. If God can find balance between judgment and compassion, then surely so should we, as we strive to live our lives in the image of God. There is a rabbinic writing, I'm sure I mentioned this in my classes, it's one of my favorite quotes. The rabbis ask the question, does God pray? And usually if I'm speaking to a group, I take a vote. How many of you believe God prays? And usually a distribution of people that either believe that God prays, but of course the rabbis who love prayer and love God are certainly going to say that God prays. And then they ask the question, what is God's prayer? And their answer is, and I love the opening of this, God says, may it be my will, I love that, that my aspect of compassion is stronger than my aspect of justice. And there's another discussion along these same lines that says that just if you have a fragile glass, so think about Roman glass, which isn't annealed and it isn't, Pyrex or Corning where it's fragile glass. They said just as if you have a glass, if you pour into it very hot liquid, it will break. And if you pour into it very cold liquid, it will also break. What do? You mix the hot and the cold, and then the glass can endure. So too, if God acted only with the aspect of justice, the world wouldn't last because we're all guilty of something and deserve punishment for what we're guilty of. So the world wouldn't last. And if God acted only with the aspect of compassion, then the world wouldn't last because no one would bother to avoid sinning, knowing that God would forgive us for all the sins. So what does God do? God mixes God's aspect of justice and compassion, and the world endures. On that hopeful note, so God's compassion, Stephen, is after the flood. God promises never to do that again in exactly that way again. So that's one aspect. And then all the commandments about protecting the weak and powerless, I would say, are evidences of God's compassion. So any other thoughts? Hopefully this video will endure, and I can send it out tonight. And we'll pick up with the conservative discussion next time. And I hope that you all do well, both in your own health, and if some of us have health challenges we are struggling with, and also with avoiding natural disasters.
And be grateful for the ceasefire in Gaza.
Yeah, right.
We haven't discussed that yet. May that come
now,
to fruition.
Are you guys all okay with the fires?
I think most of us personally are okay. Lois was saying she has friends that have been burned out, and I have actually one of Sonia's nephews. Their home is in the midst of Pacific Palisades, and apparently has been spared. But now you've got this home sitting in the midst of a disaster, and so
are any of these places near Tarzana?
Not really.
My son lives very close in West Hills, and he had to evacuate for wind and smoke. But
and part of Tarzana up in the hills was evacuated.
So Tarzana south of the 101 freeway, if you.
So was Encino.
Yeah, I have parts, and Encino was evacuated also. Yeah,
but in
the fires didn't spread in that part of the valley, to my knowledge.
Yeah, in the highly populated area known as the Valley, so far there haven't been fires in the valley. I think there's been smoke, and there have been evacuations. And Jim was saying in Moore Park he hasn't had power for several days at his home because the power company has cut off 3 days. Wow.
It reminds me of the Northridge earthquake, where not deliberately, not by choice, there was no power for a couple of days, and how you have to deal even when the ground stops shaking and the wind stops. Dealing without electricity is a big deal.
Yeah, and it's so the idea is to shut off power lines so that power lines, dropping and sparking won't set off other fires. And an article in the Los Angeles Times this morning about that. Sorry?
Why don't they just run the power lines underground so it's not an issue?
Well, yeah, you can. It's very expensive to put power lines underground. It's very expensive, and also the electrical characteristics of doing that. You increase I don't know I think it's the capacitive inductance, and so the aspects of conducting electricity become an issue, but mainly it's the expense. So that's basically, if you put everything underground, it's very, very expensive and also disruptive. But more and more, we live in a community where all the power lines are underground, but apparently we're on a circuit of Edison where there are power lines above ground. So we are on a particular circuit where when it's shut off, a wide area is shut off, not just the overground aspect. But eventually it'll probably do it. Maybe put hydrogen pipes in, all around.
As we learned from the Northern California fires, there are parts of older areas that even above ground are so aged, that they contribute to the problem that we wouldn't never spend the money to go underground all over, but we learned from a maintenance and aging that I'm sure applies to LA too, that the parts of the sources of these sparks could have been mitigated if they were maintained differently or upgraded along the way.
Yeah. And the utilities, PG&E actually went bankrupt for a few years because of that fire, the Paradise Fire, and they have instituted interesting legal remedies for that. But there's a big fund, and if it turns out that Edison is really responsible for some of these fires, that fund will be quickly vacated.
The state, I mean, if we thought that the insurance companies got really got in claims in Paradise and in the more rural areas, think of the Malibu and Beverly, in all the areas, the insurance companies, if they can pull out their hair, have probably done that also, figuring out, as well as the state, because both of those parties are going to try to help the people, but it's not easy to do.
Yeah, it is a nightmare, and there's huge neighborhoods which are just gone. So it's not only the people who live there, but people who work in those neighborhoods. Housekeepers,
Right.
gardeners, plumbers, people who work in the shops. The schools are burned down.
Wow.
It's really,
and the ash. I was listening today on television. The ash can be toxic. It can.
yeah. We're not done, and it's reminded me in some odd way of the feeling I had not on October 7th, but by a couple days later, I felt nothing is ever going to be the same. Nothing will be the same in Israel, and nothing will be the same here for us or all of diaspora. And I've had that feeling now about LA. Nothing is going to be the same.
That's right. I 100% agree with you, Lois. 100%.
But I would also point out that I think it was one of the former directors of FEMA that said, Los Angeles, this is your Katrina.
That's right.
That's true. But there's also been all over, not all over, but some on the internet who said we're being punished because we supported Israel in the war in Gaza.
It's easy people say that, but
so
the Katrina part is sort of relevant. Somehow it seems like LA is worse than anything, not comparing it to Israel, but all these other big disasters.
Katrina killed far more people.
Okay.
I think about 1,500 people.
Okay.
But also wiped out entire neighborhoods. And one of the things that happened after Katrina, you got to remember, I'm always the optimist. That happened after Katrina is things were just rebuilt. So I remember I actually attended a rabbinic conference in New Orleans, maybe 7 or 8 months after Katrina. And the head of the local medical system, the educational system said, basically, the educational system went entirely, I don't even know if this is true or still true, but all the schools were charter schools after Katrina. Basically, they were all rebuilt. That the entire medical infrastructure was redone because so much was destroyed. And I have to tell you, on the streets of New Orleans, there is a sense of people being responsible for each other. I think I've had 2 children that lived in New Orleans, and they've been ill, and they have gotten the greatest care from people who work in New Orleans, and also just from street people. And I think Katrina did that. It made people more sensitive to the suffering of others. So I'm always looking through things through an optimistic lens. I think you're absolutely right, Lois. Things aren't going to be the same. And I think, conceivably some things will be better and some things will be worse.
Well, I think that, it's just the lawsuits are just beginning. I think there's already a suit against Southern California Edison. And and on and on. But our mayor, who's had a lot of trouble getting herself together, I mean, it's appalling how she's been, and I've known her 30 years, maybe even longer. She just has, but finally, she's announced some things. One of the things, for instance, she's passing a law, it has passed city council, that people will be able to put temporary housing on their empty lots until the houses are rebuilt. And I thought, this is a really important idea, that you could bring, like a trailer or a tent or whatever.
Right. So there's zoning issues, right?
Yeah. Well, right. And we're notoriously, but I think there's some on the political side, which is more where my field is. I think it will not be the same. I don't think they'll be able
to. It will clearly not be the same. I think we'll conceivably see these communities rebuilt with higher standards of fire resistance.
That's true.
My nephew's house was rebuilt because he had a mold infestation due to water leakage. So he was out of the house for a year and a half. He just got in a few weeks ago and now is gone again. But the entire exterior of the house was done with stucco, and there's no, in the attic there's no vents which would allow embers to come in. And there was an article in the LA Times recently about what allowed some houses to burn and what allowed other houses not to burn. And they say some of it is luck, but some of it is just building techniques. And of course, after these earthquakes, there are different standards for building. So I am
also problems with the environmental movement, which is, with all good intentions, had the law of unintended consequences. For instance, they don't want controlled burns. And I grew up in Chicago, and they still have controlled burns. You have to have them.
Right. So anyway, there's, there are political issues and environmental issues, and we bumble along. And I agree with you, it will never be the same. I would say there will be aspects that will be better, and there will aspects that will continue to be painful. And, for many people, this is an absolute disaster and tragedy.
It's reminding me actually of what happened during 9/11 and what downtown Manhattan is like now.
Yeah.
It'll never be the same.
Yeah. I think the New Orleans example is also possible. Some things could be recovered and better.
So an example, I was on the URJ board, and we, like you did, Rabbi Mike, you tend to go to those places to show support. And so what I remember, one of the things I remember from our visit to New Orleans, I don't know how long it was after Katrina, but it wasn't terribly long. We learned that one of the churches and the synagogues, who still were okay, they made a joint effort to share the use of the facility for Friday nights and Sundays, and dealt with a kosher kitchen and did a lot of things
that
allowed the two parts of the community to move forward when and I don't remember which one the source was, but the positive experience was how the community rose to the occasion in a positive way.
Yeah, and I will close with the ultimate nechemta, which is the state of Israel. So literally out of the ashes of the Holocaust, where 80 to 90% of Jewish leadership in Europe were murdered. We have a thriving state of Israel. I mean, there are problems there, but it's thriving and probably not at great risk of being eliminated. And I always talk about how on a rabbinic visit to Israel, the president of Germany was visiting at a state visit to Israel. And I actually happened to be in the Knesset when the president of Germany was escorted by an Israeli armed honor guard to speak in the Knesset. So this would have been, 50 years after the Holocaust. So if that can happen, it's we are commanded.
If I can add this, Yair Lapid, who was at the time he was only prime minister for a short period, but he tells the story under the umbrella when we get asked to talk about how can you be hopeful, And the story that Lapid tells is when he was prime minister, he visited a concentration camp in Austria. And president of Austria at the time, there were maybe a couple hundred people, so he wasn't just by himself. The president of Austria comes up to him and apologizes. And he says, Mr. Lapid, I feel that I should apologize because my country killed your grandfather.
Yeah. So, Yesh Tikva, we have an anthem called Hatikva, which means the hope. And I hope you are all well and hope to see you again soon.
Take care. Good night, everybody.
Thank you.
All right. Good night, Rabbi.
Good night. Yes.
All right. So, Rabbi, I should be coming home.
Hold on one second. Hold on. I'm just